Hey guys, tonight we begin with a pair of stockings that did not dry before morning. They hang near a weak fire in a rough frontier cabin, stiff in places, still damp around the feet, and needed by a child who cannot open a drawer and choose another pair. A coat waits on a peg. It is patched, perhaps too large, perhaps already promised to an older brother for the outdoor work. The room is cold enough that getting dressed feels less like beginning the day and more like signing a small contract with winter. And this is what no warm clothes really means tonight. Poor frontier families were not universally walking through snow in thin shirts and optimism. They owned clothing. Some had wool, linen, deerskin, blankets, stockings, coats, or several layers. The problem was that a poor household might not have enough good, dry, well-fitting winter clothing for every person at the same time. One wet garment, one worn sole, or one growing child could expose how little protection stood behind the first layer. That difference matters because clothing on the early frontier did not begin in a store. It began in a field, on the back of a sheep, in a hunted hide, or inside a bag that had taken months of work to fill. A later recollection from a family travelling toward Marietta, Ohio, in 1790, tells of a painful loss on the road. The mother and her daughter had knitted a large supply of socks and stockings before the journey. They packed them into a bag, and the boys, sleeping in the wagon, used it as a bolster. Somewhere along the way, the bag disappeared. A family member retraced the previous day's route, but it was gone. Only the pairs, kept separately for washing, remained. And the family would not have sheep in Ohio for years. That was one family's remembered experience, not a rule for the whole frontier. Memory may smooth some edges while sharpening others. But the loss shows what a bag of stockings meant. It was not cheap clothing. It was stored labour, wool, needles, tired fingers, planning, and the certainty that warm feet would still matter months later. Losing it was rather like losing a small clothing store, except the store was made by your mother and had been used as a pillow. If quiet history about damp stockings, suspicious cabin walls, and families trying to negotiate with winter sounds like good company tonight, like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which ordinary object in your home you would suddenly value most if replacing it required months of work. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine the cabin before sunrise. We are somewhere in the early 19th century woodland frontier, where a settler family has built close enough to the forest to see trees from the door and far enough from a dependable market that almost nothing can be replaced quickly. The dwelling may be one open room, with cooking, working, eating, repairing, and sleeping pressed together. Older children might use a loft. A bed may be a cloth tick filled with whatever suitable plant material the family can obtain. Better bedding may come later, after more cloth, more poultry, more tools, and more settled years. For now, the fire has fallen low. A hand reaches into the ashes. Grey powder shifts. Somewhere underneath, a coal is still red. That little coal is more than atmosphere. It is yesterday's chopping, hauling, splitting, stacking and carrying, held overnight in one fragile point of heat. If it survives, the family can build from it. If it dies, someone must make flame again in a room where every breath already feels colder than it should. The coat on the peg cannot warm the room. The stockings cannot dry themselves. Breakfast will not cook without fuel. Warm water will not appear because the family has had a difficult week. Winter is extremely consistent about these things. So the household begins moving. Someone feeds small dry pieces into the fire. Someone checks the larger wood. Someone else pulls bedding tighter around a younger child for another few minutes. A garment is turned so the damp side faces the heat, but not too close, because cloth, sparks, and sleepiness are an unpleasant combination. The door opens. Cold air crosses the floor. The person going outside braces, and everyone inside feels the cost of that opening. This is the first rule of frontier winter. Warmth was not one object, it was a chain. Clothing was one link, shelter was another. Fire, food, labour, dry bedding, and timing completed the rest. A family with limited clothing could compensate, for a while, by keeping the dwelling tighter, the fire supplied, the bedding dry, the meals regular, and the daily work carefully ordered. But every solution demanded something else. More fire required more wood required more labour required more food required successful crops, animals, hunting, storage, trade, or money. If illness removed one worker, or snow blocked a road, or wet weather spoiled the fuel, the family did not lose one convenience. Pressure moved through the whole chain. That is why the rugged survivor image can mislead. Toughness mattered, skill mattered, experience mattered. But cold does not become harmless because someone has a determined expression. A body still loses heat. Wet fabric still chills. Hunger still weakens work. Wind still finds gaps. The family survived when enough parts of its system kept functioning at once. The system was also unequal. The person chopping wood paid in aching shoulders and numb hands. The person spinning, knitting, cutting, sewing, washing and patching paid in hours that disappeared into cloth. Children paid by learning chores early and wearing what could be altered to fit them. The sick paid through dependence, and someone, often the person already responsible for several other tasks, had to notice that the stockings were still damp, the quilt needed moving, the fire was fading, and the youngest child had gone quiet from cold. There was no single frontier household. A family in wooded Indiana did not solve winter exactly like a later Nebraska homesteader. Access to timber, markets, sheep, tools, neighbours, and cash changed the problem. Some households arrived with featherbeds and extra blankets. Others began with a partly finished shelter and whatever they could keep dry. But poverty had a recognisable effect. It removed the spare layer, the second coat, the extra blanket, the dry shoes waiting by the bed, the reserve stack of fuel, the money for cloth, the healthy adult who could take over when another person became sick. Without those reserves, survival depended on catching small problems early. A coal preserved under ash, a crack filled before the wind rose, a heel patched before the hole widened, a child pulled away from the draft, a damp garment turned at the right moment. And so, while the room slowly warms, keep your attention on the stockings beside the fire. They look ordinary. Inside them a sheep that may not yet belong to the family, hours of work that cannot be repeated quickly, and a winter morning that will become much harder if they remain wet. The stockings are waiting for heat, and the heat is waiting for everyone. Before those stockings can become warm again, it helps to understand how much work has already been trapped inside them. On the frontier, clothing did not begin when someone picked up a needle. It began months earlier with an animal to feed, a plant to grow, a hide to prepare, or a journey to a trader who might not have the cloth a family could afford. A fleece becomes useful only after shearing, cleaning, sorting, carding, spinning, and knitting or weaving. Flax demands planting, pulling, drying, breaking, processing, spinning, and weaving. Deerskin or other hides require hunting or trade, cleaning, softening, cutting, and sewing. Each material follows a different route, yet all of them pass through hands before they reach a child's body. Frontier clothing was homemade, in much the same way a cabin was homemade. The word quietly hides several months of work. In an early Ohio settlement, a piece of clothing might begin as flax in a field or wool on a sheep. A boy helps tend the crop. Someone shears. Someone cards. A spindle turns. Yarn forms between fingers that are already expected to cook, carry, wash, feed, repair, and care for children. A loom may turn yarn into cloth. A needle finally turns cloth into a garment. Then the child grows. The sleeves rise above the wrists. The garment is opened at a seam. A strip is added at the cuff. Buttons are moved. A dark patch covers a lighter elbow. The clothing survives another season, though it now carries the visible history of every shortage it has crossed. Later, the same garment passes to a younger sibling. The knees bend in the wrong place. The shoulders are too wide. A cuff is folded. A tie replaces a broken fastening. The family is not choosing a bad fit over a good one. It is choosing a bad fit over less protection. And when the cloth can no longer remain a garment, its useful life may still continue. The strongest section becomes a patch. A cleaner piece enters a child's clothing. A smaller scrap becomes a tie. Later, several scraps may meet inside a quilt. One piece of cloth can move from field to fibre, from yarn to coat, from coat to patch, and from patch to bedding. Nothing disappears quickly if it can still perform one more job. The work behind this chain was shared, but not equally. Men and boys might tend sheep, plant flax, hunt, prepare hides, build equipment, or use a loom in some households. Much of the continuous spinning, knitting, cutting, sewing, washing, altering, and mending fell heavily on women and girls. The same hands might also prepare meals, tend children, manage bedding, preserve food, and keep the room usable while smoke and cold competed for it. A girl sits with a stocking stretched over one hand. The heel has worn thin again. She draws thread through the weak place, building a small net across the hole. The repair must be strong enough to survive pressure inside a shoe and smooth enough not to punish the foot it is meant to protect. Food waits. Water waits. A younger child waits. The stocking does not care. This is why homemade clothing can sound too charming. The garment may be cheaper in cash because someone has paid for it with time, and time was one of the scarcest winter materials. The household also had to decide where its best clothing would go. The stronger coat might be reserved for the person travelling to town, attending worship, negotiating credit, or doing work farthest from the fire. Everyday garments absorbed mud, smoke, grease, animal hair, sweat, splinters, and repeated repairs. Saving the better coat was not always vanity. Sometimes it was the only garment that allowed a family member to enter town without advertising desperation. Clothing protected reputation as well as skin. A poor family could not always satisfy both needs at once. The warmest stockings may go to the person walking furthest. The better coat may follow whoever must leave the property. A younger child may receive an altered garment because growth makes new cloth a risky investment. Someone working near the hearth may wear a thinner layer than someone outside, even if the person indoors is not actually warm. The records rarely preserve every argument around those decisions. An inventory may list 2 coats without saying who wore the weaker one. A memoir may remember a hard winter without remembering which child stood beside the door waiting for footwear. Scarcity creates allocation, and allocation turns warmth into a social question. Who must go outside first? Who can delay a task? Whose garment must be repaired tonight? Who is still small enough to fit what someone else has outgrown? If one dry pair of stockings must serve 2 necessary trips, clothing becomes a schedule. One person leaves, the other waits. The first returns wet. The stockings move toward the fire. Another task is delayed. The door opens. The room cools. More wood is added. A small shortage begins touching several parts of the day. That is why clothing cannot be separated from the household heat budget. A garment is useful only if it fits well enough, remains dry enough, survives the work, is repaired in time, and is available when needed. Even excellent wool cannot protect 2 people at once if there is only one coat. A sheep dies, flax fails, a wheel breaks, a trader does not arrive, a worker becomes sick, a child grows. None of these events sounds dramatic by itself. Together, they decide whether a family enters winter with useful layers or with a collection of repairs pretending to be a wardrobe. The easiest way to picture frontier clothing is not as a closet, but as a pipeline. At one end are fields, animals, forests, tools, and trade. In the middle are hands. At the other end is a child waiting beside the fire for something dry enough to wear. The stockings are beginning to steam now. Good news, but not complete safety, because even perfectly dry clothing loses its advantage inside a room that cannot hold heat. Around the family, between one log and the next, the cabin is already beginning to breathe cold air through its walls. The loom adds another physical step. A foot works the treadle. A shuttle crosses. The cloth grows only a little at a time, while daylight shortens and the room needs the same fire for cooking and warmth. A frontier coat did not begin with sewing. It began with land, animals, tools, and someone willing to turn all of them into cloth during hours that could have been used elsewhere. By the time the child wears it, the garment has already passed through an entire household economy. Not dramatically. The cold enters as a thin line around the door, a pale thread between two logs, a draft moving low across the floor where the youngest children feel it first. It touches an ankle. It finds the damp edge of a stocking. It moves a candle flame sideways and reminds everyone that a house can stand upright without being finished. A log cabin looks solid from a distance. Thick timber, heavy roof, snow resting on top in a way that makes the whole scene appear almost peaceful. Then you place your hand near the wall. If the gaps between the logs have not been properly filled, the wall behaves less like a wall and more like a collection of excellent wooden suggestions. Chinking and daubing mattered because logs do not meet perfectly. Depending on place, time, and available materials, people might use wood pieces, clay, mud, lime, grass, stones, or other material to close those spaces. The exact mixture varied. So did the quality of the work. A household with enough time, tools, help, and experience could make a cabin much tighter than a family that had arrived late, built quickly, or lost labour to illness. That difference was not cosmetic. A narrow gap could turn firewood into wasted effort. Heat rose, smoke moved, the door opened, and cold air replaced what escaped. The family could feed the fire again, but every additional piece represented another swing of an axe, another trip outside, another burden carried through snow or mud. The war was spending their labour. In one early Ohio recollection, a family endured a snowstorm in a cabin that still lacked proper chinking, daubing, and a finished door shutter. Snow entered through the openings while the occupants kept a large fire through the night and used the bedding and skins available to them. That account belongs to one household in one unfinished dwelling. It should not be stretched across every frontier cabin, but it shows the physical truth clearly enough. When the house failed to hold warmth, people replaced missing construction with fuel, bedding, wakefulness, and discomfort. Someone presses material into a crack. Fingers push mud or clay between the logs. Small pieces of wood give the filling something to hold against. The surface is smoothed. A child watches from near the hearth, learning that house repair is not separate from living in the house. The family may be eating, sewing, drying clothes, and fixing the wall within the same few hours. The cabin is not a finished object. It is an ongoing argument with weather. The door creates another problem. A properly fitted wooden door takes material, tools, hinges, and skill. A rough temporary covering may keep out some wind without sealing the opening well. A blanket or hide can block a draft in a particular case, but it also removes a useful object from a bed. A wooden shutter reduces cold and also reduces light. Light matters when people are sewing, mending, preparing food, or working with tools. Close the opening more tightly and the room darkens. Admit more daylight and lose more heat. Frontier life contains many decisions that are less about solving a problem than choosing which problem is allowed into the room. The floor may be packed earth, rough boards, or another locally practical surface. Where cold air moved near the ground, the floor became part of the winter experience. Bare or poorly protected feet felt it. Bedding placed low felt it. Water containers, food, tools, and clothing occupied the same thermal landscape. A child steps down from a bedtick and learns immediately which parts of the room belong to winter. Near the fire, the air may be almost comfortable. A few steps away, it is not. The fireplace creates a small territory of heat, strongest nearby and weaker toward the walls, corners, loft, and door. Smoke may enter the room, sparks threaten cloth. The person nearest the hearth receives warmth while also performing work. That arrangement makes space social. Who sleeps closest to the fire? Who takes the loft? Who sits near the light to sew? Who moves aside when wood comes in? Who opens the door and lets the cold cross everyone else's feet? The surviving records do not provide a complete seating chart for a poor family on a winter night. We should not invent one. Yet a one-room dwelling necessarily turns distance from heat into a household resource. Age, sickness, work, authority, and habit may shape how that resource is distributed. The room becomes a map of dependency. The baby cannot gather fuel. The sick adult cannot repair the roof. The person sewing beside the fire may appear fortunate until we notice that the warmest chair has excellent heat and terrible working hours. An older child in a loft may gain distance from floor drafts and lose comfort near the roof. Outside the woodland regions, the same problem changes shape. On parts of the Great Plains, families could not assume thick stands of timber waited nearby. Some built dugouts into slopes or constructed walls from sod. Earth could provide useful insulation, making such dwellings comparatively stable in temperature, but that did not turn them into clean underground hotels. They could be dark, damp, muddy, crowded, vulnerable to insects, and dependent on careful construction. A sod wall is not proof that the family defeated winter. It is proof that the family changed materials. Instead of stacking logs and filling their gaps, they cut blocks from the ground. Instead of depending on abundant timber, they used earth, grass roots, roof supports, and whatever wood could be obtained. The structure might hold heat better than a badly finished cabin, yet daily life still depended on fuel, ventilation, dryness, repair, and the number of people inside. A patched coat protects the body from the room. The wall protects the room from the weather. The chinking protects the fire from becoming wasted labour. The door protects the bedding from the next wave of cold air. Each layer stands outside the next, like clothing built on a larger scale. And just as a garment can wear through at the elbow, a cabin can fail at its smallest weak point. Mud cracks. A shutter shifts. Roof material loosens. Water enters. Snow gathers where it should not. The family notices because the candle flame moves again, and the draft returns to the same place near the floor. A hand reaches toward the wall. The cold line is still there. Someone adds more material. Someone moves the bedding. Someone turns toward the woodpile. Because a tighter cabin reduces the demand for fire, but it never removes it. The wall may be the family's outermost garment. The fire is what gives that garment meaning. But fire is not a glowing object waiting politely in the middle of the room. It has to be built, fed, watched, cleaned around, protected from damp, and supplied again before the last useful heat disappears. In a woodland settlement, the presence of trees could make fuel look abundant. The forest might begin only a short walk beyond the cabin. From the doorway, the family could see more wood than it could possibly burn in one winter. That did not mean the wood was ready. A standing tree is not a warm room. Someone must choose it, cut it, divide it into manageable lengths, split the heavier pieces, carry or drag them home, stack them where air can move around them, and keep enough dry material close to the house for the next storm. You would learn very quickly that seeing trees from the door was not the same as having firewood. An axe strikes frozen wood. The handle jars the hands. Chips fall into snow or mud. Breath appears briefly in front of the face. A man or older boy may perform much of the heavier cutting in one household, but fuel work rarely belongs to one person alone. Smaller children carry kindling or short pieces. Someone clears a place near the hearth. Someone notices which stack is dry. Someone keeps wet wood from being mixed with the pieces needed quickly. The family is moving tomorrow's warmth closer to the bed. A large pile outside can still be misleading. Part of it may be green, snow-covered, poorly split, or too far from the door when the wind becomes severe. Winter has little interest in inventory that cannot be burned. Inside, the fire has several jobs at once. It warms the nearest part of the room. It cooks food. It heats water. It helps dry stockings and other damp garments. It provides light after sunset, though not always enough for delicate work. Every task draws on the same fuel. That creates a quiet competition. A larger fire warms the room faster, but consumes wood faster. Clothing placed close enough to dry risks smoke, sparks, or scorching. Cooking can demand an arrangement of coals that does not produce the strongest room heat. Boiling water uses time and fuel that cannot be spent elsewhere. A frontier fire is less like a modern heating system and more like one exhausted employee being asked to run the kitchen, laundry, lighting, and climate control departments at the same time. Then wet wood arrives. It smokes before it burns. The pot is moved. A stocking remains damp. Someone opens the door for clearer air, and the cold crosses the floor again. A poor fire does not create one problem, it makes several jobs slower at once. The room never warms evenly. Near the hearth, a face grows hot while the back remains cold. A person turns, then turns again. The floor still holds a draft. Smoke gathers when the chimney draws poorly. The fire creates a circle of usefulness, not a blanket of comfort. Someone pulls a chair closer. Someone else needs the space to stir a pot. A child moves stockings along the edge of the hearth. A patch of cloth hangs where it can catch warmth without catching flame. The household continually rearranges itself around the strongest few feet of heat. And then, the door opens. The person bringing in wood carries warmth for later and cold air for now. Snow or mud enters with the boots. The wood is set near enough to dry, but not so close that sparks create a new emergency. The door closes. The fire begins repairing the interruption. This cycle can repeat all day. The work extends into darkness. If the household depends on an open hearth or another heat source that does not safely hold warmth through the whole night, someone must decide how much fuel to use before sleep and whether the fire should be renewed later. There was no universal frontier schedule. Practice varied with dwelling, weather, fuel, equipment, age, health, and family habit. The underlying pressure remains. A fading fire turns sleep into a calculation. Add too much fuel and valuable wood disappears quickly. Add too little and the room cools before morning. Arrange the fire poorly and it dies. Treat it carelessly and flame becomes a threat inside a wooden home filled with cloth, bedding, dry plant material, and tired people. So someone studies the coals, not with romance, with experience. A useful bed of coals carries heat forward after the flames drop. Ash slows the loss. Small dry pieces revive what remains. The family learns which wood catches readily, which burns longer, and which only fills the room with smoke while pretending to help. Fuel quality changes everything. Dry hardwood, where available, behaves differently from green branches. A family arriving late in the season may possess less properly seasoned wood than a household that prepared months earlier. Illness, injury, bad weather, broken tools, or urgent farm labour can reduce the time available for cutting and stacking. The woodpile therefore contains a record of the previous seasons. A tall, dry stack may reveal planning, healthy labour, access to timber, working tools, and enough time to prepare. A small or damp stack may reveal late arrival, sickness, overwork, poverty, or bad luck. The fire can only burn the past work the household managed to store. On the open plains, the problem may look different. Timber can be scarce, distant, or too valuable to use casually. In some places and periods, families used dried buffalo or cattle dung for heating and cooking. Such fuel could produce useful coals, though it did not recreate the behaviour of a strong wood fire. This was a regional response, not a universal frontier habit. A child collecting dried fuel from the ground is doing the same basic work as a child carrying kindling near a woodland cabin. Both are gathering future heat in a form the landscape allows. By late afternoon, the cabin may feel warmer than it did at dawn. Food has cooked, some clothing has dried. The children move farther from the hearth because the nearest space is now too hot. For a moment, the family appears to have solved winter. But the flames will fall. The door will open again. Evening work will continue. Every piece added to the fire will shorten the stack outside. The family can watch the fire. The fire cannot refill the woodpile. And somewhere beyond the door, tomorrow's warmth is still standing in the forest, scattered across the prairie, or waiting in a stack that may not be as large as everyone hopes. Tomorrow's warmth may still be standing in the forest, but tomorrow's clothing is usually not waiting anywhere at all. It has to be found inside what the family already owns. A coat passes from an older brother to a younger one. The shoulders are too wide. The sleeves hang past the hands. Someone folds the cuffs, moves a button, and decides that looking slightly swallowed by wool is preferable to being properly visible and properly cold. Fit follows availability. The garment does not ask who needs it most. It exists in one size, with one history of wear, and one remaining chance to remain useful. In a low-cash frontier household, the coat may be opened at the side seam. A strip of cloth is added, a cuff is extended, the missing button becomes a tie. One elbow already carries a patch, and the patch itself has begun to thin. The coat is not failing all at once. It is failing by inches. Poverty is often easiest to see not in the absence of an object, but in how long the object must continue after it should have been replaced. A wealthier household might buy cloth or keep more than one useful outer layer. A poor household absorbs damage through repair. When a sleeve tears, someone mends it. When a hem frays, someone turns it. When a child grows, someone opens old seams, adds material, shortens another garment, or accepts that the fit will remain wrong. Clothing moves downward through the family. An adult shirt becomes a boy's shirt. A worn dress is cut smaller. A coat too damaged for town survives as work clothing. When that ends, the strongest sections become patches. Smaller scraps become ties or padding. Eventually, the cleanest pieces may enter a quilt. Nothing is wasted quickly because almost nothing arrived cheaply. The phrase hand-me-down can sound harmless now. On the frontier, it could mean wearing the shape of someone else's body. The knees bend in the wrong place. The waist sits too high. The shoulders restrict movement. A younger child gains warmth and loses ease. The family keeps adjusting because the alternative is not a better fit. The alternative is less protection. A girl sits near the hearth with a stocking stretched over one hand. The thread is drawn through the worn heel again and again. The repair must hold under pressure inside the shoe. Beside her, another garment waits with a split seam. Food needs attention. A younger child leans against her shoulder. Smoke catches in the throat. Winter is built from small work. Mending does more than extend clothing. It protects the labour schedule. A torn stocking can slow a child carrying wood. A broken fastening exposes the chest while travelling. A split seam widens during work until the garment becomes harder to save. So someone has to notice. That person needs light, thread, a usable needle, time, and enough skill to understand what the cloth will do under pressure. A needle can be lost. Thread can run short. Evening light can be weak. Fingers can be cracked from washing, cold, or lye soap. History often describes sewing as a quiet domestic accomplishment, which is a gentle way of saying that someone was expected to solve fabric emergencies after finishing several other jobs. The better coat may still be saved for travel, worship, or business in town. Everyday clothing faces mud, smoke, grease, animal care, sweat, wood splinters, and weather. Preserving one presentable garment is not simply vanity. Respectable appearance can influence how a family is judged by merchants, employers, religious communities, neighbours, or potential marriage partners. The good coat may be the only thing allowing someone to enter town without advertising desperation. It has two jobs. It must keep out cold. It must also keep out judgment. Poor families cannot always satisfy both needs at once. The same tension appears in children's clothing. A growing child makes every stitch temporary. Add length this winter, and the wrist may be exposed next winter. Make the garment generously large, and the child works inside cloth that catches and restricts movement. Fit it closely, and the family risks losing it to growth before the material has repaid its labour. There is no perfect solution because the child keeps doing the unreasonable thing of becoming larger. A younger sibling waits next. By then, the cloth has thinned, the colour faded, and the strongest sections have already been claimed by repairs. The garment becomes a family archive. Yet the archive does not tell us who complained, who accepted it quietly, or who spent the evening making it fit. An inventory may list coats and trousers. It rarely records the argument over who needed the driest pair of stockings that morning. Scarcity forces decisions, and decisions distribute discomfort. The strongest coat may go to the person walking farthest. A better blanket may cover a sick child, while another child sleeps nearer the wall. An adult may surrender gloves to an older child doing outdoor work. These choices varied. They cannot be turned into one universal rule. What can be said is that limited clothing had to be allocated, and allocation turns warmth into a social question. Who must leave first? Who can delay a task? Who receives the dry pair? Who still fits what someone else has outgrown? A modern closet hides this pressure with abundance. Several shirts, several pairs of socks, extra shoes, clothing for work, sleep, rain, snow, and public appearance. On the frontier, one damaged garment could force several people to reorganize their day. The coat near the door now belongs to whoever must travel farthest. The patched stockings are finally dry, though the repaired heel feels thick under the foot. The child puts them on anyway, then the shoes follow. And this is where the clothing system reaches its most vulnerable point, because a patched coat can still hold warmth around the chest, while one wet foot can make every step outside feel longer than the last. The better coat may be required for a trip to town on the very day the weather is worst. A merchant is more likely to extend credit to someone who appears dependable. A prospective employer may judge a worker before hearing the explanation behind every patch. The household therefore brushes the garment, closes the strongest fastening, and sends one person out wearing more of the family's respectability than warmth. Back at the cabin, someone else takes the weaker coat. The public garment remains an asset only because private discomfort has quietly been moved onto another body inside the cabin. One wet foot can make every step outside feel longer than the last. The cold itself is only part of the problem. Moisture changes the calculation. A dry stocking traps some warmth. A damp one carries cold against the skin. A shoe that keeps out dust in summer may admit snow, slush, or water in winter. Once the inside is wet, the foot begins supplying heat to the moisture around it, which is an expensive arrangement when the rest of the body is already trying to stay warm. The child steps through the doorway. Snow presses against the worn edge of the shoe. The sole bends where the leather has thinned. A repaired seam holds for the moment. The stockings were dry beside the fire, but the morning work cannot be completed from the warm side of the door. Perhaps the task is small. Carry kindling. Check an animal. Bring water. Clear enough snow to make the entrance usable. Winter does not care that the assignment sounds small. The child reaches the woodpile dry enough. On the return trip, snow slips through the weak edge of the shoe. By the time the kindling reaches the cabin, the stocking is damp around the toes. The same clothing needed for the next task has already begun asking for the fire again. A bucket can splash. Snow caught around an ankle melts near the hearth. Sweat from hard outdoor work can damp inner layers, even when no snow enters at all. Clothing becomes wet from outside, inside, or both, which feels unnecessarily thorough. This is why staying dry sounds much easier than it was. A poor household may have few spare stockings, few shoes, and limited warm space for drying anything. The fire already has food to cook, water to heat, and a room to warm. Damp clothing has to join the queue. A pair of stockings is turned near the hearth, not directly over flame. Too much heat can scorch cloth, stiffen leather, weaken seams, or create a household emergency considerably worse than cold feet. The garment is moved, checked, turned again, and perhaps draped where smoke reaches it before warmth does. The shoe presents a harder problem. Leather can stiffen as it dries. Mud must be removed. A worn sole cannot be restored by placing it beside the fire and maintaining a hopeful expression. If the household has material and skill, a patch can be added. If not, the shoe continues into service because the work outside still exists. Footwear varied by region, period, material access, and household means. Some people wore leather shoes or boots. Some used moccasin-style footwear in particular contexts. Some families repaired and reused shoes until the object had become less a manufactured item than a continuing negotiation. We cannot honestly claim that every poor frontier child walked barefoot through snow. The evidence is too uneven, and the frontier too broad. A stronger claim is available. Poor families had fewer barriers between a damaged shoe and a serious interruption of work. A prosperous household might replace footwear, purchase leather, hire labour, or keep another pair available. A poor household is more likely to absorb the failure through repair, delay, improvisation, or someone else's discomfort. The hole in the soul, therefore, belongs to everyone. If the child cannot carry wood, an older sibling takes the next trip. If an adult delays outdoor work while shoes dry, animals still require attention. If a traveller cannot leave, supplies may not arrive. One wet foot can move labour from one body to another. Near the doorway, a woman kneels with the shoe across her lap. The light is weak. A younger child leans against her shoulder. She pushes a tool through resistant material, depending on what the household owns and knows how to use. The leather is cold in her hands. The repair must survive bending, mud, and pressure. There is no guarantee that it will. The household does not ask whether the repair is perfect. It asks whether the repair survives the next necessary task. A strip covers the weak place. The seam is pulled tight. The shoe returns to the floor. Useful again, at least according to the generous frontier definition of again. Moisture also enters the cabin through ordinary living. Wet garments hang inside. Snow melts from shoes. Water is carried in. Cooking produces steam. A small room filled with bodies, food, damp cloth and smoke does not behave like a modern heated bedroom. Drying one object adds moisture to the air. Opening the door for ventilation loses heat. Keeping the room closed preserves warmth and may preserve smoke and dampness with it. The family is again choosing which problem receives permission to remain. The bedding must be protected. A wet coat thrown over a bed tick can transfer moisture to the place that must hold warmth through the night. A child climbing under covers with damp stockings can make limited bedding less effective. A leak, a spill, or wind-blown snow can turn the bed from refuge into another cold object. So clothing has a geography inside the cabin. Wet items go near heat, but not too near. Dry bedding stays away from the door, if the room permits. Shoes remain where mud can be managed. Better garments are protected from sparks, smoke, animals, children, and work. A one-room home may not provide enough space to do any of this neatly, which is why neatness is sometimes a luxury disguised as a personality trait. The family's real skill lies in maintaining separation inside scarcity. Dry from wet, repairable from ruined, tomorrow's clothing from tonight's fire. The child returns to the hearth after the next trip. Slow clings to the lower legs. The repaired shoe has held, but the stocking is damp again. Another pair does not appear. Should the child stay near the fire? Does someone need that space for cooking? Can the next task wait? How much wood can be burned now without reducing what remains for the night? A household with abundant clothing can separate the problems. Remove the wet layer. Put on the dry one. Dry the first later. A poor household may have to solve all of them at once. After 1 week of this, you would stop asking whether you owned enough clothing for winter and start asking whether any of it could stay dry long enough to remain useful. Time matters as much as material. Wet clothing handled early may remain inconvenient. Wet clothing ignored becomes colder, harder to dry, and more damaging to the day's work. A small tear repaired now may preserve a garment. The same tear used for 3 more chores may widen beyond easy repair. The household survives partly by noticing when a minor discomfort is about to become a larger expense. The axe is easy to remember. The storm is easy to remember. The person touching a stocking to decide whether it is dry enough rarely receives the same attention. Yet that quiet inspection may protect the household schedule better than a dramatic act later. By afternoon, several garments hang near the fire. The room smells of smoke, damp cloth, food, leather, and human closeness. One shoe is turned to expose the wetter side. A patched stocking waits for another trip outside. Beyond the door, more work remains. Inside, the clothing is slowly returning to usefulness. But the woodpile has lowered again, because every wet garment asks the fire for more heat. And once moisture steals warmth from clothing, the household must repay the loss with fuel, food, time, and another person's labour. That is why the woodpile may be the closest thing the family owns to a true winter coat. Not the coat hanging by the door, not the patched stocking drying near the hearth. The stack outside. Each split piece contains heat that has not yet been released, along with the hours required to find it, cut it, move it, stack it, and keep it dry. The family does not wear the wood directly, which is fortunate because walking around inside a pile of oak would create several new problems, but the principle is the same. The pile places a barrier between the body and the cold. Only at a distance, a man stands beside a tree with an axe raised over one shoulder. The first blow bites into the trunk, the next deepens the cut. Chips gather near his boots. The work warms him while exposing him to wind, sweat, damp cloth, and the cold handle against his hands. The warmth stored in the wood may last longer, but only if he finishes the job. A felled tree still has to be divided. Large sections must be cut into lengths the family can move. Heavy pieces need splitting. Branches become smaller fuel. Kindling is gathered separately. The wood must reach the cabin and be stacked without trapping too much moisture. It is a chain of tasks pretending to be a pile. In a household with healthy adults, older children, working tools, nearby timber, and enough time before winter, the chain may be difficult but manageable. Remove one part and the pressure rises quickly. A broken axe handle delays cutting. A sick worker reduces the amount gathered. An injured shoulder turns every piece into a negotiation. A late arrival leaves less time for seasoning. Heavy snow makes hauling harder. The family may see plenty of wood around it. The problem is that most of the wood remains stubbornly shaped like trees. A child carries 3 split pieces toward the cabin. One drops on the path. The child stops, lifts it again, and continues. An older sibling carries more. Inside, someone clears space near the door and brushes melting snow from the floor. This is how warmth enters the house before it becomes fire. It comes in dirty pieces, carried against clothing already becoming wet. Dry wood should remain dry. Greener pieces need time. Kindling must be protected because a household that owns large logs, but no reliable way to start them, has achieved the heating equivalent of a locked pantry and a missing key. The smaller reserve near the door also has to be counted. 12 split pieces in the morning. 9 after breakfast and drying, 7 before evening. The number is not exact for every household, but the habit of watching the reserve is easy to understand. When wind rises during the night, no one wants to search beneath a drift for the piece that should already be beside the wall. The nearby stack continually shrinks. A piece goes into the fire for breakfast. Another heats water, more are added to dry clothing. The room loses heat when the door opens. Evening arrives. The family watches the stack outside and the fire inside, comparing two disappearing things. This creates winter arithmetic. Burn more now and the room becomes comfortable. Clothing dries faster and tired bodies recover. Burn less now and the household protects the future supply. But everyone works and sleeps in greater cold. The correct answer changes with weather, food, health, and shelter quality. There is no universal frontier rule stating exactly how warm a poor cabin remained or how often fuel was added. The trade remains. Every degree of comfort has already been paid for somewhere outside. The person splitting wood pays through the shoulders and back. The person carrying it pays through time and exposure. The person tending the fire pays through interrupted work and attention. The person rising before dawn may pay through sleep. The person preparing meals decides how much of the same fuel can be used for cooking without weakening the room's heat. Warmth is shared. Its cost is not. On the Great Plains, where timber could be scarce, the woodpile might be smaller, more valuable, or partly replaced by other fuels. In some places and periods, settlers gathered dried buffalo or cattle dung for heating and cooking. The landscape offered the material, and families used it because warmth does not become less necessary when firewood is inconvenient. A child or adult bends to collect dry pieces. The fuel is stored and protected from weather. It may produce useful coals with less visible flame than wood. This was a regional adaptation, not a frontier-wide custom. The landscape decides which form the labour takes. In timber country, the family cuts and splits. On open prairie, the family may search and gather. Near a market, fuel may sometimes be bought. But buying converts the same problem into money, transport, and access. There is no location where warmth becomes free. The woodpile also measures preparation across seasons. Winter fuel must be gathered before the hardest cold arrives, while crops, buildings, animals, food, and clothing still demand attention. The family knows winter is coming, but knowing does not create extra daylight. Cut more wood and another task waits. Repair the roof and the stack remains smaller. Travel for supplies and lose a day of cutting. Care for a sick child and lose several. One reasonable decision can make another necessary task more dangerous later. By midwinter, the stack tells the story. If it remains high, the family may feel relief. If it falls faster than expected, every fire becomes an argument with the calendar. How many cold weeks remain? Who is healthy enough to go out? Can wetter pieces be mixed with dry ones? Can the room be kept colder during the day? Can everyone sleep closer together? The answers move pressure from the fuel pile into the household. A smaller fire means slower drying. Slower drying means damp clothing. Damp clothing makes outdoor work harder. Harder work demands more food. Less efficient labour brings in less fuel. The system begins feeding its own weakness. The title has changed shape now. The family may lack one excellent winter coat, but the deeper danger is lacking enough stored labour to keep the household warm. A coat protects one body for a few hours. The woodpile protects many bodies, dries garments, cooks food, heats water, and carries the room through the night. The thickest coat in the household may be stacked outside in split pieces. It is the larger garment. It is also the heavier one. Late in the day, someone returns with another load. The face is red from wind, sloe has melted into the cuffs. One piece enters the fire immediately. The rest join the reserve near the door. For a moment, the room brightens. A child turns damp feet toward the heat. A pot begins to simmer. The wall feels less cold. The family has not defeated winter. It has purchased another hour with labour already performed. And as the flames rise, the question is no longer whether everyone is tough enough. The question is whose time, strength, food, and sleep are being burned to keep that hour alive. At first, the answer seems simple. The person with the axe pays. The person carrying wood pays. The person standing in the cold beside the animals pays. And they do. The shoulders ache, hands split, boots become wet. Heavy work in winter leaves little room for carelessness. But the fire reaches farther into the household than the woodpile. Someone has to notice that the room is cooling before everyone else complains. Someone has to move the drying clothes, stir the pot, check the bedding, protect the youngest child from the draught, and decide whether another piece should be burned now or saved. That person may not be holding the axe. Warmth is created by visible and invisible labour. And invisible work is easy to mistake for ordinary domestic life. In a one-room household, a woman leans over the hearth before sunrise. She is not admiring the coals. She is checking what survived the night. A red point remains beneath the ash. She feeds it carefully. Too much fuel can smother a weak beginning. Too little, and it fades. She bends closer, blows gently, waits, and adds another small piece. Behind her, the rest of the room is quiet. This may look peaceful, until we notice that peace belongs mostly to the people still sleeping. The person tending the fire has already entered the workday. The same hands may soon prepare food, warm water, dress a child, inspect damp clothing, mend a tear, and move bedding away from a cold wall. If someone is sick, the list grows. If fuel is low, every choice slows, because comfort must be rationed. The household survives together, but together does not mean equally. Age matters. Health matters. Gender expectations matter. Work assignments matter. Authority matters. A baby cannot split wood. A sick adult cannot carry water easily. An older child may sleep in a colder loft because the main room is needed for younger children, work, or cooking. A person responsible for outdoor labour may receive the driest coat. A person working close to the fire may be expected to surrender that position whenever another task needs the space. The warmest place in the cabin is not necessarily a reward. It may be a workstation. A woman sits nearest the hearth because she is cooking, sewing, drying cloth, and watching a child. Smoke stings her eyes. Heat reaches one side of her face, while cold remains at her back. The warmest chair has excellent heat and terrible working hours. You would stop competing for that corner once you understood how many jobs came attached to it. History often turns this labour into background. The fire is there. The meal appears. The stockings dry. The child is covered. The shirt has been repaired. The room has become warmer. All of these results sound almost automatic when the person producing them disappears from the sentence. Nothing in the cabin is automatic. Even sleep must be organised. Who receives the better blanket? Who lies nearest another warm body? Who sleeps near the wall? Who keeps the place closest to the fire? Who is expected to wake if a child cries? An animal makes noise? Smoke changes? Or the room becomes too cold? The surviving sources rarely preserve a complete answer for one poor household, much less every household across the frontier. It would be dishonest to invent a universal bedtime hierarchy. Scarcity still creates distribution. If there are fewer warm coverings than people, someone receives less. If only one person owns dry footwear, someone else waits. If food is limited, labour demands, age, illness, custom, and authority enter the decision. A warm cabin can hide these negotiations because the result looks communal. Everyone sits beside the same fire, but one person gathered the fuel, another repaired the coat, another prepared the meal, another surrendered sleep, another remained cold because someone else was considered more vulnerable or more necessary to the next day's work. The warmth in the room is transferred. Time becomes fuel. Food becomes strength. Strength becomes chopped wood. Wood becomes heat. Heat dries clothing. Dry clothing allows work to continue. Much of that chain passes through bodies whose names never enter the record. This is where pioneer toughness begins to fail as an explanation. Toughness can describe endurance. It cannot explain the system that made endurance possible. A child remains warmer because someone noticed the draft, moved the bedding, repaired the stocking, prepared food, and kept fuel near the door. A man cutting wood continues because someone fed him, repaired what he wore, watched the children, managed the room, and made it possible for his labour to leave the household for several hours. The tasks depend on one another. So do the people. Survival was not one heroic act. It was 1,000 ordinary acts performed before they became emergencies. A seam repaired before it split. A child warmed before shivering deepened. A woodpile built before snow covered the path. Food preserved before the harvest ended. A wall sealed before the wind shifted. A coal protected before the last flame disappeared. The household paid for winter in advance whenever it could. When it could not, someone paid later with more labour, or less sleep, or less food, or a colder place in the room. By evening, the fire is strong again. A returning worker places wood near the hearth. A pot hangs over the heat. Damp stockings have become nearly dry. A child sleeps against folded bedding. The room appears calm, but the calm looks different now. It is the surface created by hours of work. Every object has a person behind it. The repaired coat, the filled wood box, the meal, the covered child, the coal under the ash. And once warmth is understood as transferred labour, the next question becomes harder to ignore. When everyone finally lies down, what exactly is the bed doing? It is not merely receiving tired bodies. It is taking over the work of the fire. By the third morning, you would stop measuring comfort by who sat nearest the flames. You would measure it by who could leave that place without 3 other tasks failing. The person at the hearth may warm a hand for a few seconds, then use that hand to lift a pot, turn a stocking, settle a child, and test the ash. Warmth does not remain with the person producing it. It passes outward through work. The household calls the result an ordinary morning, because ordinary is the name people give to necessary labour that must happen again tomorrow, before anyone ever praises it. Once the flames fall, the bed becomes the last place where warmth can be held, instead of continually produced. That makes bedding more than furniture. It becomes a second shelter inside the first one. A mattress on the frontier might be a cloth tick filled with whatever useful material a household could obtain and prepare. In some places and households, that could mean straw, corn husks, dried plant material, or feathers. Feather beds required birds, cloth, time, cleaning, and accumulated resources. They were not soft clouds drifting naturally into poor cabins. The filling mattered, but so did what covered it. A blanket, quilt, hide, or layered sheet slowed the loss of body heat. A quilt made from scraps followed the same logic as a patched coat. Small pieces of cloth that could no longer serve as full garments were joined into something large enough to preserve warmth through the night. The scraps did not become valuable because they were pretty. They became valuable because cold air passed through them more slowly once enough had been stitched together. A woman spreads a quilt across the bed. One square may come from a worn dress, another from a shirt too damaged to repair. A darker strip once formed a sleeve. The stitches do not erase poverty. They organise what remains. Travel advice for families moving west sometimes recommended carrying multiple blankets or quilts for each person. That recommendation tells us what experienced travellers believed useful. It does not prove that poor families possessed the recommended amount. A guide can say 3 blankets. A wagon can still contain 1. The cold begins in the distance between the recommendation and what the family actually carried. A well-supplied household may spread several layers over each sleeping place. Another combines what survives travel, rain, damage, trade, and wear. One blanket may be folded under a sick child. The better coat may be placed over the bed at night and returned to the peg before dawn. A hide may serve as an extra layer in a household that owns one. Daytime clothing may sometimes remain on the body because removing protection makes little sense, but this cannot be treated as a universal habit. What is clear is that poor households made limited coverings perform several jobs. Bedding had to protect against the cold surface below. It had to hold warmth above. It had to remain dry. It had to survive children, smoke, dirt, insects, sparks, repairs, and repeated use. And it had to do this without a sealed bedroom, controlled heating system, dependable laundry cycle, or modern mattress. The bed frame may be simple. Rope or wooden supports hold the tick above the floor. If the supports sag, the sleeper sinks toward the middle. Tightening them improves support, though tidy explanations linking the practice to old sayings are often cleaner than the evidence deserves. The physical problem remains. A loose bed is uncomfortable. A damp bed is cold. A bed beside a draught is both. So the family rearranges the room. The sleeping place is moved farther from the door if space permits. Bedding is lifted away from a wall that feels wet or cold. The youngest child is placed where someone can reach quickly. An older child may use a loft, gaining distance from floor drafts and encountering a different temperature above. Warm air rises, but a loft is not automatically comfortable. Roof gaps, wind, smoke, limited headroom, and weak bedding change the experience. One child may lie beneath the roof, listening to weather scrape across material only a short distance away. Below, the main room settles. The pot is moved. Tools are put aside. Clothing remains near the hearth. The fire reduces to coals. Every person entering bed carries some heat into it. This is where bodies become part of the insulation system. In some households, people shared beds because space and bedding were limited, and sleeping close helped preserve warmth. We should resist turning this into one universal image of every frontier family packed under one quilt. Sleeping arrangements varied by age, gender, household size, custom, status, furniture, and dwelling design. Scarcity still shapes the arrangement. If there are more people than warm coverings, distance between bodies becomes expensive. A child curls beside a sibling. A parent settles near a younger child. Someone takes the outer edge. Closer to the room, someone else receives the center. The record may preserve the number of beds or blankets without preserving who slept where. It may list household goods and remain silent about the person nearest the draft. Comfort is distributed, but documents often record only objects. The bed also preserves heat by reducing movement. During the day, a person opens doors, crosses cold floors, handles wet tools, and stands in moving air. At night, the same body lies still inside layers that warm gradually. A cold bed may feel punishing at first. The tick is chilled. Fabric touches cold skin. Feet search for a warmer position. The sleeper draws the knees upward, pulls the covering closer, and waits while body heat changes the small enclosed space. You become the heating system and hope the bedding has not resigned. A warmed bed is valuable enough that leaving it becomes a genuine cost. Before dawn, the person responsible for the fire must uncover an arm, then a shoulder, then the rest of the body. Heat escapes. Feet meet the floor. The bed begins losing what it collected during the night. That first person pays twice. They lose the warmth of the bed, then they rebuild the warmth of the room. Behind them, everyone else remains under the coverings a little longer. The bed is not replacing labour. It is storing the result of labour temporarily. The quilt exists because cloth was preserved and stitched. The tick exists because material was gathered and filled. The bed remains dry because wet garments were kept away from it. The room is warm enough for sleep because fuel was gathered. The people inside can produce heat because food was available. A poor household may protect bedding with unusual care. A spark hole has to be repaired. Dampness must be noticed. Filling may need replacement or redistribution. A quilt too worn for public display remains useful because warmth has no concern for appearance. Even the bed's location can change with the weather. Move closer to the fire and risk sparks, smoke, or congestion. Move farther away and lose heat. Place bedding near the wall and gain floor space while accepting the draft. The room offers positions with different costs. By midnight, the fire has faded. The walls cool. The outer layers of bedding cool with them. Inside, a smaller pocket of warmth remains around sleeping bodies. The cabin's outer garment is weakening, but the inner shelter still holds. For a few hours, the family is no longer feeding the fire. The bed is feeding on the heat they carry within themselves, and that heat has to come from somewhere. By morning, the quilt may still be warm in the centre, but the bodies beneath it will need food before they can begin producing another day of labour. Warmth does not come only from blankets and fire. The body has to make some of it from within. That requires food. In a low-cash woodland household, a sack of meal stands near the wall. It may not be the only food in the cabin. Depending on season, place, household means, crop success, hunting, livestock and trade. There may also be beans, roots, preserved meat, dairy products, dried fruit or other stores. There was no single pioneer menu waiting on every table. The useful question is what the food had to do. It had to keep people alive, support heavy work, help bodies recover from cold, and last until fresh supplies became available. A meal was part of the household heat budget. Food became movement. Movement became chopped wood, carried water, repaired walls, tended animals, and clothing returned from the yard before it froze stiff. Near the hearth, someone lifts the lid from the sack. The level is lower than it was a week ago. A measure of meal enters the pot. Water follows. Perhaps salt. Perhaps fat. Milk. Beans. Meat, or something preserved, depending on what the family owns. The mixture thickens over heat while smoke moves above it. The food may be plain, but plain food can still carry a day of labour if there is enough of it. Enough is the difficult word. The pantry is a calendar with fewer dates every time someone lifts the lid. A sack of grain is a number of mornings. A side of preserved meat is strength divided across weeks. A jar, crock, barrel, root cellar, or hanging bundle represents work completed before the weather closed in. Like the woodpile, the pantry is the visible shape of earlier labour. And like the woodpile, it can shrink faster than expected. The person cooking watches more than the pot. How much meal remains? Which food will spoil first? How much fuel can be used? Who will be outside longest? Who is sick? Who is growing? There is no universal rule for dividing food inside poor frontier households. It would be too neat to claim that the strongest worker always received the largest portion, or that children always came first. Authority, affection, age, labour, illness, custom, and scarcity could pull decisions in different directions. Scarcity always creates choices. A person doing hard outdoor work may need more food to continue. A sick child may need special care but have little appetite. An adult may quietly take less. Another may not. The meal reaches the table. Steam rises. Hands move toward bowls. The room briefly smells warmer than it feels. A hot meal can make a poor cabin feel secure for 10 minutes. The effect is real and temporary. A hungry person tires faster. A tired worker cuts less wood. Less wood means less heat. Less heat means wetter clothing and worse sleep. The stomach and the hearth are connected. So are the pot and the woodpile. Every boiled meal consumes fuel. Long cooking demands more attention and heat. A larger fire may warm the room while cooking, but it also lowers the stack outside. Heating and cooking are not separate needs when both depend on the same supply. The cook moves the pot over stronger heat, then away. Coals are arranged to keep food simmering without feeding a large flame. The exact method varies with hearth, stove, utensils, and household practice. The skill lies in using one fire for several purposes without wasting what winter has made expensive. No one writes an epic poem about placing a pot where it can cook without consuming the evening. Poor households survive through hundreds of such decisions. The sack by the wall continues to lower. A child notices scattered grain near its base. Someone finds a tear. The remaining contents are moved. The floor is cleaned as well as possible. The container is repaired. Another small emergency is prevented before it grows teeth and eats breakfast. Food also had to remain protected from dampness, mould, rodents, freezing, thawing, animals, and poor containers. A damaged sack did not merely create a mess, it shortened the calendar. Preservation required labour and judgment. Meat might be salted, smoked, dried, or stored under conditions that varied by region and household. Vegetables and fruit could be dried, pickled, or stored where materials and knowledge allowed. Grain had to remain dry. Roots needed suitable conditions. None of these systems guaranteed abundance. They extended time. That distinction matters because winter survival was often less about possessing enough forever than making what existed last until the season opened again. A family might stretch a meal with more water, meal, beans, or available roots. Richer ingredients may be used sparingly. Leftovers enter another dish. Bones may continue giving flavour after the best meat is gone. Nothing useful leaves the pot quickly. From a comfortable kitchen, this can sound like rustic cleverness. Inside the cabin, it is evidence that waste has consequences. The person serving the meal knows which child has eaten slowly, which adult worked outside, and how much remains for tomorrow. The bowl is a household ledger. After several closed-road days, you would stop asking whether the meal was filling and start asking how many breakfasts remained. Food becomes labour almost as soon as it is eaten. The person who was cold at dawn can carry water. The child with patched stockings can bring kindling. The adult at the woodpile can swing the axe longer. The person near the hearth can stir, sew, wash, lift, and watch the fire. Hunger threatens more than appetite. It weakens the systems protecting the family from cold. A smaller meal means slower work. Slower work means less fuel. Less fuel makes sleep worse. Poor sleep increases mistakes. A dropped tool, missed chore, or damp garment left too long then demands more energy. The household can enter a downward turn without one dramatic disaster. Poverty makes recovery harder. A wealthier family may purchase grain, hire help, slaughter another animal, or travel with better equipment. A poor family has fewer reserves outside its own bodies. If the pantry fails, the people themselves become the final store of labour. That is not the same as saying every frontier family starved each winter. Many planned carefully, stored successfully, traded, hunted, raised animals, and reached spring with food remaining. The danger lies in the narrow margin. A storm lasts longer. An animal dies. A crop disappoints. A road closes. A barrel spoils. Someone becomes ill and can no longer work. The meal grows thinner, or the demands outside remain the same size. By evening, the pot is empty. The bowls are cleaned. A little meal remains in the repaired sack. The fire is lowered. The family returns to bedding that will hold whatever warmth their bodies can still make. For now, everyone has eaten. Tomorrow's labour is possible, but the household heat budget has one weakness no careful rationing can fully control. A body can receive food, bedding, and fire, and still become sick. A body can receive food, bedding, and fire, and still become sick. At that point, the household does not lose only one healthy person. It loses work. A cough deepens through the night. A fever keeps someone beneath the quilt after dawn. An injured hand cannot close around an axe handle. A twisted ankle turns the distance between bed and woodpile into a serious problem. The room contains the same number of people, but the amount of usable labour has changed. Every person performs more than one function. The adult who cuts wood may also repair the roof, tend animals, and travel for supplies. The person who cooks may also mend clothing, manage bedding, watch children, and keep the fire from disappearing during other tasks. When one body stops, the work does not stop with it. It moves. Someone else takes the bucket. Someone else enters the cold. Someone else delays sewing, cooking, or sleep to provide care. The household becomes smaller without anyone leaving the room. Imagine an adult lying near the hearth, with one hand wrapped after a tool injury. We do not need a dramatic accident. A split hand, strained back, or fall is enough to reduce useful work. The family still needs fuel, animals still need attention, water still has to enter the cabin. An older child takes the smaller wood basket and makes 2 trips instead of 1. Another adult adds outdoor work to an already full day. The injured person watches the wood box lower while being unable to replace it. The chores do not become more considerate because the household has become less capable. Illness creates the same pressure from another direction. A feverish person needs warmth, water, food, clean bedding, and attention while producing less labour. If that person normally maintained the fire, prepared meals, repaired clothing, or watched children, care work multiplies precisely when the household has fewer hands available. A child wakes coughing. The sound is not proof of catastrophe. Most illness does not become a dramatic historical event. But inside a poor winter household, an ordinary sickness can disrupt the balance. Someone sits up. The child needs water. The fire needs fuel. The bedding must remain dry. Another child wakes because the room is moving again. The person providing care loses sleep, then begins the next day already tired. This is how one weakness spreads without being visible from outside. The cabin still stands. Smoke still rises. No traveller passing at a distance would know the household has begun paying twice for every task. Young children face a particular dependence because they cannot replace the system protecting them. They cannot purchase better bedding, repair the wall properly, or move the woodpile closer. They rely on adults and older siblings to notice when they are cold, wet, hungry, or unwell. The smallest child may be placed near a warmth where possible. A better covering may be moved. Someone may hold the child close, giving body heat while losing freedom to complete another task. That care is not merely an expression of affection. It has material consequences. Arms holding a child are not splitting wood. A person awake through the night is not fully rested for morning work. Extra fuel burned for a sick body lowers the reserve. Food prepared separately may require more time and heat. Care enters the same budget as everything else. Older people, injured workers, pregnant women, very young children, and those with chronic weakness face different forms of vulnerability. But the sources do not allow one neat statement across every region and decade. What can be said safely is that winter punished reduced mobility and reduced work capacity. A person who could not create warmth through movement depended more heavily on fire, bedding, food, and other people. The cruel part is not that frontier families lacked compassion. The cruel part is that compassion did not create more wood. A mother can pull another blanket over a child, but only if another blanket exists. A father can remain inside with a sick family member, but outdoor work waits. An older sister can take over cooking, but another duty moves to someone else. Love reorganizes scarcity. It does not erase it. This is where poverty becomes more dangerous than discomfort. A household with money may purchase medicine, food, fuel, labour, or replacement goods where available. A poor family has fewer ways to buy time. It draws more heavily on relatives, neighbours, credit, stored goods, and the body's still able to work. If help is distant, even asking becomes labour. Someone has to travel. The traveller needs clothing, footwear, food, daylight, and a reason to believe the road is passable. A storm can convert social support from a possibility into something physically unreachable. Inside the cabin, the sick person rests. The word sounds gentle, but the bedding may be crowded, the room smoky, and the temperature uneven. Water needs warming, clothing needs changing if it becomes damp. The person may sleep through the day and remain awake at night, pulling the caregiver's schedule apart. The records often preserve severe illness more readily than ordinary weakness. A death may appear in a register. An epidemic may enter a local history. The week when one family member could barely work, everyone else became exhausted, and no one wrote it down is harder to recover. Those quiet episodes may have shaped winter survival more often than spectacular catastrophe. A family does not need to lose a person permanently for illness to become expensive. It only needs to lose that person's labour at the wrong moment. Before a storm, before fuel is moved closer, before an animal is secured, before clothing dries, before food is prepared, before a crack in the wall is repaired, timing turns weakness into risk. By afternoon, the injured adult tries to stand. Perhaps the attempt is sensible. Perhaps it is too early. There is no physician waiting in every settlement, and the family may have only experience, local knowledge, home remedies, and whatever advice can be reached. We should not romanticize this as admirable independence. Sometimes necessity simply wears the expression of courage. The person returns to a smaller task. One piece of wood is carried instead of an armful. An animal is checked from the doorway. A child takes the heavier bucket. The household adapts because stopping entirely is not available. Adaptation can conceal the cost. Everyone appears busy. The fire remains lit. Food reaches the table. From outside, the system still seems successful. Inside, people perform unfamiliar work while tired, worried, and cold. Mistakes become more likely. Tools are handled by less experienced hands. Meals simplify. Repairs wait. Sleep shortens. The family may survive the illness and still enter the next week weaker. The woodpile is lower. The food stores are smaller. Clothing repairs have accumulated. Someone else begins coughing. One person replaces another. One reserve replaces a missing worker. One blanket replaces a stronger fire. One smaller meal protects tomorrow's food. Each choice works briefly. Together, they reduce the margin that remains. Night comes again. The sick child sleeps near the warmest available place. Someone listens to the breathing before lying down. The fire is arranged carefully. The quilt is pulled into position. A cough interrupts the quiet. A coal shifts beneath the ash. And somewhere beyond the people whose names entered diaries and local histories, there were poorer households whose winter weakness left almost no written trace at all. That silence changes how this story has to be told. A diary may describe the weather, the depth of snow, the condition of a road, or the number of days a family remained indoors. A letter may mention a sick child, a shortage of flour, or a journey delayed by cold. An inventory may list coats, blankets, tools, beds, livestock, and household goods. Records are very good at counting blankets, and surprisingly poor at remembering who was cold beneath them. An inventory can prove that a household owned 2 blankets. It cannot tell us which child slept against the wall. A cabin may survive in a museum or historical park, carefully repaired and protected from weather. The building can show its size, materials, distance between hearth and bed, and the limited number of places where a family could work or sleep. It cannot remember every winter lived inside it. Objects speak, but they speak in pieces. A quilt reveals repeated repair, valuable cloth reused in smaller sections, and the labour required to join scraps into a warm covering. A worn shoe reveals pressure at the heel or the shape of a foot. A spinning wheel shows that a household possessed a tool for making thread. The wheel does not tell us whether it stood unused for a month because its operator was ill. A patch does not identify the person who stitched it after everyone else went to bed. A smoke-darkened beam does not record how often eyes watered beneath it. This does not make material evidence weak. It makes it honest. A surviving wall can prove that air had to move through a particular space. A small room shows how close cooking, sleeping, childcare, storage, and repair had to remain. A household list may show that one family owned fewer beds or blankets than another. The danger begins when we ask the evidence to provide a complete life. Later memories create another difficulty. Many frontier recollections were written years or decades after the winters they describe. By then, the writer knew who had survived, which settlement had grown, and which hardships had become family stories. Memory can preserve extraordinary detail. It can also simplify. A terrible winter becomes the winter. A difficult cabin becomes the first stage of eventual success. The mother who repaired everything becomes a symbol of patience. The father who cut wood becomes a symbol of endurance. Children remember cold floors, smoke, hunger, laughter, fear, or adventure. But adulthood may arrange those memories into a cleaner story. That does not make memoirs useless. It means they must be read as memory, not as a window with the glass removed. A person recalling a lost bag of stockings can show how valuable those stockings seemed and how long the loss remained worth remembering. The account does not establish how every family travelled, how every household replaced clothing, or how every winter unfolded. One story can open a door. It should not be made to house an entire population. Official records have their own habits. A tax list cares about taxable property. A probate inventory cares about possessions after death. A court record cares about conflict, debt, obligation, or inheritance. A military report cares about supplies, discipline, and the needs of an institution. The poorest families may appear only when they owe money, request assistance, move away, lose property, or come into contact with authority. Their ordinary successful days leave less evidence. So do many ordinary, difficult ones. A woman may appear as a name attached to a husband, a widow managing an estate, or a person receiving household goods. Her daily labour may be compressed into repaired clothing, prepared food, and children who survived. A child may appear in a family count, a baptismal record, a grave record, or not at all. A hired worker may be remembered only as labour. A tenant family may leave the dwelling while the landowner's name remains attached to the place. The record is unevenly lit. Some people stand near the centre because they owned property, wrote letters, held office, or belonged to institutions that kept documents. Others remain at the edge, visible through objects, numbers, complaints, and the work they left behind. This is why the phrase, "frontier families did this," must be handled carefully. Which frontier? Which decade? Which family? A wooded Ohio settlement near the beginning of the 19th century did not operate like a Nebraska homestead generations later. A family with sheep, tools, nearby kin, and access to a mill possessed a different winter system from newcomers living far from trade, with little stored fuel. Even the word poor changes according to place. A household may own land and still lack cash. It may possess livestock but little cloth. It may own blankets and lack food. It may have a strong cabin and an injured worker. Poverty on the frontier was not one empty cupboard. It was a shortage in the wrong place at the wrong time. Popular images flatten these differences. The log cabin becomes one universal home. The fur coat becomes one universal garment. The cheerful fire becomes one universal heating system. The quilt becomes proof that hardship was cozy. It was not. The quilt may have been beautiful. It may also have existed because the household could not afford to lose another scrap of cloth. The cabin may have inspired affection. It may also have leaked smoke and cold. The family may have laughed, celebrated, and built a meaningful life. None of that requires pretending material pressure was charming. Nostalgia prefers hardship after the danger has passed. It turns insufficient shelter into simplicity. It turns repeated labour into character. It turns shared beds into closeness without asking whether anyone had another choice. We cannot recover every missing voice, but we can refuse to cover the silence with invented certainty. Where the evidence is strong, we can speak plainly. Clothing took labour. Fuel took labour. Bedding preserved heat. Small dwellings forced work and sleep close together. Poor households had fewer reserves. Where evidence varies, the language must vary with it. In some households, in certain regions, later writers remembered, the records suggest, The popular version is cleaner than the surviving evidence allows. These phrases are not obstacles to the story. They are part of its honesty. By now, the cabin is quiet again. The sick child sleeps. The fire has lowered. A patched quilt rests across several bodies. Near the wall, one repaired shoe waits for morning. No diary lies open on the table. No official enters the room to record who woke first, who ate less, or who surrendered the warmer place. The family may leave behind a name. It may leave a cabin, a quilt, a tool, a grave, or nothing that survives. But the absence of a full record does not mean the labour was absent. It means the labour was ordinary enough to disappear. And once that is understood, the old image of the isolated frontier family begins to weaken. Because even the families missing from the record were rarely surviving alone. The cabin may stand by itself. That does not mean the household does. A family can live miles from town, beyond a rough road, with no close neighbour visible from the door, and still depend on a network larger than the room. The network may be thin. It may be unreliable. It may ask for repayment later. But it exists. An axe handle breaks during cutting. The family owns the axe head and still cannot use the tool properly. A neighbour has a spare handle or lends another axe. The tool crosses the distance between the two households. The woodcutting continues. Repayment may come later through labour, produce, shared transport, or help when the neighbour's own work becomes too heavy. The cabin remains technically independent, provided nothing made of iron or shaped wood breaks. A borrowed tool keeps the heat system moving. A neighbour's team helps move something too heavy for one household. A relative watches children while an injured adult travels for supplies. Someone shares news about a road, a storm, a trader, a mill, or a family in trouble. From a distance, the cabin still looks alone. The popular frontier story likes that view. One family, one fire, one determined figure with an axe. The landscape is empty, the household self-contained, and success rises entirely from private courage. It is a powerful image. It is incomplete. A poor family might make much of what it used, but almost no household could produce every tool, every metal object, every medicine, every kind of cloth, every container, every seed, every spare part, and every service it needed. One small object could stop a large chain of work. A broken needle delays repair. A damaged blade slows fuel gathering. A cracked pot complicates cooking. A failed harness limits transport. The family's independence can be interrupted by one piece no one in the cabin knows how to make. So someone travels. Perhaps the journey leads to a nearby settlement, a blacksmith, a mill, a store, or another household. The traveller needs time, food, clothing, and passable weather. If cash is scarce, payment may come through produce, labour, goods, future obligation, or credit. The family survives partly because someone believes it will repay what it cannot pay today. A merchant's ledger may hold a household through winter almost as surely as a quilt. That does not make debt gentle. Credit can create dependence, embarrassment, pressure, and future work. A family receiving supplies now may owe crops, money, or labour later. The help solves one problem by moving its cost forward. Still, when food is low or a tool has failed, a future burden may be preferable to a present collapse. Neighbours matter in the same way. A frontier neighbour does not need to live next door. The word may describe someone far enough away that visiting requires planning. Yet that household can become essential when work exceeds the strength available in one family. Building a structure, moving heavy logs, harvesting quickly, caring for someone ill, recovering livestock or managing an emergency may require more bodies than one cabin contains. People gather, hands lift, animals pull, food appears from several kitchens. Work that would take one household days becomes possible before the weather closes in. The event may later be remembered as community spirit, and sometimes it surely was. It was also practical mathematics. Many hands reduce exposure. Many hands finish the roof before snow. Many hands move the fuel before the path becomes impassable. The social feeling and the survival function belong to the same scene. A quilting gathering shows the quieter side of the network. Pieces of cloth have already been saved. The top has been assembled. Several people work around the frame, moving the project forward through shared skill and time. The finished quilt may enter one household, but the labour comes from many. Conversation travels with the needle. So does information? Who is ill? Who needs help? Which family has cloth to trade? Whose animal is missing? Which road is worst? Have supplies reached the store? Community is not only hands working together, it is knowledge moving before danger does. Kinship can make the network stronger, but kin are not guaranteed. Some settlers arrived near relatives, others moved far from them. Some households lived inside extended family arrangements. Others depended more on neighbours, religious communities, employers, landlords, merchants, or temporary partnerships. A widow, injured worker, newly arrived family, or household with small children might need more assistance than it could easily return. This is where community reveals its limits. Help can be generous. It can also be selective. Reputation matters. Race matters. Religion matters. Language matters. Legal status matters. A household accepted by the surrounding community may receive credit, labour, shelter, and warning. Another may remain excluded, distrusted, exploited, or invisible. The frontier network did not wrap around everyone equally. Even cooperation had borders. This is also important when the story touches knowledge held by people already living in and adapted to the region. Indigenous nations possess deep knowledge of local weather, materials, plants, animals, roots, clothing, shelter, and seasonal movement. Settlers sometimes learn through trade, observation, exchange, coercion, displacement, or other forms of contact. That knowledge should not be renamed as generic pioneer cleverness, and different indigenous cultures should not be flattened into one source of survival tricks. The narrower truth is enough. Frontier households often depended on knowledge and systems that did not begin with them, even when later stories made their survival appear entirely self-invented. The same is true of tools, seeds, livestock, roots, and markets. The isolated cabin rests on connections reaching beyond the clearing. A family cuts its own wood with an axe made elsewhere. It cooks its own food in a pot made elsewhere. It repairs homespun clothing with a metal needle made elsewhere. It may grind grain at a mill built through collective labour or owned by another person. It may survive because a merchant extends credit, a neighbour shares food, or a relative offers shelter. Self-reliance often means maintaining enough relationships to avoid complete dependence on any single one. That is less dramatic than standing alone. It is also more realistic. By late winter, the household knows who can be asked for what. One neighbour owns a better tool, another has stronger animals, a relative can provide a sleeping place, someone knows how to repair leather, a merchant may allow another small purchase, a local healer, physician, midwife, or experienced older person may offer advice, though access and methods vary widely. The network is imperfect. So is the household. Together, they create a wider margin than either possesses alone. Then weather tests the connections. Snow covers the road. Wind makes travel dangerous. An animal weakens. A family that could borrow yesterday may be unable to reach anyone today. Someone looks through the doorway. Beyond the yard, the path has nearly disappeared. The family still has food. Some fuel remains. The bedding is dry. The repaired shoes are near the hearth. Under ordinary conditions, a neighbour, trader, mill, or relative might help replace what runs out next. But ordinary conditions are closing. The system has survived through clothing, shelter, fire, food, labour, care, objects, memory, and other people. Now several supports are weakening at the same time. Winter does not need to destroy the cabin. It only needs to close the road long enough for the household heat budget to begin collapsing from the inside. At first, nothing looks catastrophic. The fire still burns. The pantry is not empty. The bedding remains dry. The danger begins because each reserve is smaller than it appears. The family adds another piece of wood to the fire. It catches slowly. The better fuel has already been used, leaving pieces that are greener or wetter. Smoke thickens before the flame improves. Someone opens the door briefly to clear the air, and the room loses heat at the exact moment the family is trying to create more. One solution begins charging another problem. A stronger fire dries clothing faster, but consumes the remaining fuel. A smaller fire preserves wood, but leaves the room colder and garments damp longer. Keeping the door shut saves heat, but leaves smoke and moisture inside. Opening it improves the air and sends warmth outside. The household is no longer choosing between good and bad options. It is choosing which shortage should worsen first. Outside, snow has covered the path to the larger stack. The reserve near the door remains accessible, but everyone can see the floor beneath it now. 6 split pieces. 5 after the wet wood finally catches. 4 when water is heated. A child carries in 2 more because the wind has strengthened. The adult, who normally brings the larger load, is still recovering from illness or injury. The pieces reach the hearth. The person carrying them does not complain. The family begins rationing heat through space. Work moves closer to the fire. The outer edge of the room becomes storage instead of living space. A blanket may be hung to reduce the area that must be warmed, if one can be spared. Bedding is shifted. A draft is blocked with material that had another purpose yesterday. The cabin becomes smaller without changing its walls. This helps, but it crowds people. Smoke, damp clothing, food preparation, tools, and sleep into fewer usable feet. Someone bumps the drying stockings. A child steps where melted snow has gathered. The quilt is pulled away before moisture reaches it. Another failure is prevented, but the person who notices loses time from something else. The meal that evening is thinner, not because the pantry is empty, but because no one knows when the road will reopen. A little less now protects a little more later. The pot has to last longer than the storm. A smaller meal produces less strength. Less strength makes tomorrow's fuel work slower. The chain tightens. A person who ate lightly carries wood and returns breathing harder than usual. Damp cuffs move toward the hearth. The same fuel now has to warm the room, dry the clothing, and cook the next meal. There is no spare department for any of this. The household is one machine, and every person is being used as a replacement part. Then the repaired shoe begins leaking. Not dramatically. The patch simply lifts along one edge. Snow enters, melts, and reaches the stocking. The wearer returns with one wet foot and removes the shoe near the fire. The timing could not be worse. Repair requires light, attention, material, a usable tool, and warm enough fingers. The person with the best skill may already be caring for someone sick. The person who can travel for supplies cannot reach the road. The shoe is repaired with what remains. Whether it lasts is tomorrow's problem. A frontier household does not need one enormous disaster. A wet shoe, a low wood box, a sick worker, and a closed road can cooperate perfectly well. Each problem is survivable by itself. Together, they remove the family's ability to solve the next one. The old stories prefer a clear enemy. The blizzard, the cold snap, the impossible journey. Such events have edges. System failure is quieter. It looks like someone deciding not to heat water. It looks like a garment left unrepaired for another day. It looks like a smaller fire at noon. It looks like a child being told to wait until the better shoes are dry. It looks like an adult lying awake, counting wood by sound as each piece settles in the box. No one outside the cabin may know the margin has narrowed. Smoke still rises from the chimney. That smoke can be mistaken for safety. Inside, the family protects the most essential functions. Keep the fire alive. Keep the bedding dry. Keep enough food for morning. Keep the weakest person warm. Delay anything that can wait. Washing waits. Non-essential travel disappears. Repairs are ranked by immediate danger. A torn cuff can wait. A leaking shoe cannot. A cracked handle may be bound temporarily. A cold corner of the room may be abandoned. Comfort has quietly left the household budget for lack of funds. The family is reducing itself to the minimum shape required to continue. That reduction carries social cost. The warmest place may go to a sick child. The healthiest adult may take the colder sleeping position. An older child may inherit work belonging to someone stronger. A caregiver may surrender the most sleep. These choices can express love, authority, necessity, habit, or all four at once. The records rarely tell us which motive ruled each moment. A household with reserves can absorb mistakes. A household without reserves converts every mistake into more labour. And labour is already failing. The fire drops during the night. Someone wakes, though perhaps not the person who usually does. The room is colder than expected. Breath shows near the bed. The coals are still present, but weak. A hand enters the ash. Small dry pieces are added first. Nothing happens. Another breath. A thin flame appears, then folds down. The person waits. Behind them, the family remains under the quilt, preserving what warmth it can. No one speaks. Speech is not forbidden. It simply has no useful role yet. The flame returns. One larger piece is added. The room has gained another chance. The wood box is lower. The person tending it is more tired. Breakfast will use more fuel. The road is still closed. This is where survival stops looking like toughness and begins looking like subtraction. Subtract comfort. Subtract sleep. Subtract food variety. Subtract clean clothing. Subtract unnecessary space. Subtract every task that does not immediately protect heat, calories, shelter, or labour. The household continues because enough remains after each subtraction. That is also why some families failed while others survived the same winter. The difference was not always courage. It could be location, health, stored food, fuel, construction quality, neighbours, credit, tools, livestock, or chance. A storm does not test character evenly. It tests reserves. By late morning, the wind weakens. The path is still buried, but the sky has changed. Someone stands at the doorway and looks toward the road. No neighbour is visible. No wagon is coming. Yet the possibility of movement has returned. Inside, the patched shoe waits. The wet stocking is drying. A thin meal is being prepared. The sick child is warmer. The fire remains alive. Nothing has been restored completely. The household has only prevented several small failures from joining into one final collapse. And beneath the grey ash, one coal continues to hold the memory of the night. By itself, it is almost nothing. A dull red point, a little stored heat. No dramatic flame, no heroic glow, no scene anyone would paint above a mantle. Yet the household has spent the entire winter learning how much can depend on something that looks this small. The person nearest the hearth bends down and checks it again. The road may reopen later. A neighbour may appear. More wood may be gathered. The pantry may stretch farther than feared. The sick child may wake stronger. None of that has happened yet. For now, there is the coal. Small dry pieces are placed around it. Air reaches the centre. A thread of smoke rises. The first flame appears so quietly that anyone still sleeping would miss it. That is appropriate. Most of the work that kept poor frontier families alive was easy to miss. The coat survived because someone patched it before the tear widened. The quilt remained useful because scraps were saved instead of discarded. The wall held a little more warmth because hands pressed material into a crack. The shoe returned to service because someone repaired it under weak light. The child ate because food had been planted, gathered, stored, guarded, and rationed months before the bowl reached the table. The room warmed because a tree had been turned into lengths, those lengths into split pieces, and those pieces into fire. Nothing happened alone. Even the stockings from the beginning carried more than wool. They carried the sheep that may or may not have belonged to the household yet. They carried cleaning, carding, spinning, and knitting. They carried the person who noticed the worn heel, the hand that repaired it, the fire that dried it, and the child who needed it again before the morning was comfortable. The child lifts them now. The repaired heel is dry enough. The stockings go on. The thick patch presses beneath one foot. The worn shoes follow. The coat beside the door still belongs to whoever must travel farthest. Nothing in the scene has become comfortable enough to satisfy a modern idea of winter clothing. But the room has fire. The bed still holds a little warmth. The pantry still holds breakfast. The road may soon hold footsteps. This is why the phrase, "no warm clothes," misleads when taken too literally. Poor frontier families often had clothing. What they lacked was margin. The extra pair, the second blanket, the dry coat waiting behind the wet one, the money to buy cloth without surrendering something else, the healthy worker who could replace the sick one, the nearby road that remained open, the fuel already cut, the food that could be used without counting how many mornings remained. Poverty did not always remove the first layer. It removed the spare layer behind it. And winter has a way of finding whatever has no replacement. A stronger household could survive a torn shoe as an inconvenience. A poorer one might experience the same tear as a delayed chore, then a wet stocking, then a smaller wood supply, then a colder room. The damage moved. Cold began outside the cabin, but it did not stay there. It entered through the wall. It crossed the floor. It reached clothing. It slowed labour. It increased hunger. It interrupted sleep. It shifted work from one person to another. It turned neighbours, merchants, relatives, animals, tools, and stored goods into parts of the same system. The frontier household was not one brave family facing nature with determination alone. It was a fragile network trying to remain connected. Some connections were made of cloth. Some were made of wood. Some were made of credit. Some were made of skill. Some were made of obligation. Some were made of affection. And some were made of the simple knowledge that if one person did not wake, notice, carry, mend, cook, or share, someone else would be colder by morning. That does not make the story less admirable. It places admiration more accurately. The figure with the axe mattered. So did the person who saved the smallest scraps. The traveller crossing a dangerous road mattered. So did the person who kept children fed while the traveller was gone. The family enduring the storm mattered. So did the neighbour who lent a tool before the storm began. History often gives its largest shapes to visible labour because visible labour is easier to remember. The axe leaves a mark in the wood. The needle leaves a mark so small that success makes it disappear. A well-repaired seam is noticed less than a broken one. A carefully managed pantry creates no dramatic scene. A child who remains warm enough through the night leaves no official record of the danger that never arrived. Prevention is quiet. That is why it can vanish from history. The cabin around the family may later become a museum building, a reconstructed room, a photograph, a line in a memoir, or nothing at all. The quilt may survive after the hands that stitched it have been forgotten. The tool may enter a collection under the name of the person who owned it, rather than the person who used it most. The record will continue doing what records do. It will preserve some objects and lose most mornings. But those objects look different now. A patched coat is no longer evidence only of hardship. It is time transferred into cloth. A woodpile is no longer background scenery. It is sleep, food, dry clothing, and future hours stacked beside the cabin. A one-room house is no longer merely simple. It is a place where warmth, labour, privacy, illness, rank, and care occupy the same few steps. A quilt is no longer a cosy pioneer decoration. It is a second roof made from pieces the household could not afford to waste. And the coal beneath the ash is no longer only fire. It is yesterday refusing to disappear completely. By now, the flame has taken hold. It reaches the first, larger piece of wood. The room changes by degrees. Not warm yet. Less cold. Someone sets the pot in place. Someone checks the child. Outside, the road is still white, but the sky has cleared. Later, perhaps, a path will be opened. A neighbour may come into view. The world beyond the cabin will return. Inside, the family begins again. There is no final victory over winter. The fire will need more fuel. Clothing will tear. Food stores will continue falling. Someone will open the door and let the cold move across the floor. Survival is not a moment when danger ends. It is the repeated act of keeping the next failure from joining the others. One more patch before the seam opens. One more meal before the work. One more load before the wood box empties. One more night with the bedding dry. One more coal protected beneath the ash. The child stands near the doorway in repaired stockings and worn shoes. The room behind is still crowded, smoky, imperfect, and alive. Under the grey ash, where no one looking through the window would think to search, a small red coal has carried the labour of an entire household safely into morning.